All right, y'all, you ready to do problem 3.23? I'll read it. The following pedigree shows the inheritance of a recessive trait. Unless there's evidence to the contrary, assume that the individuals who marry into the family do not carry the recessive allele. That last line, that pertains to all of the pedigrees, all right? You assume that the individual marrying into the family does not carry the recessive allele unless there's information to the contrary. Okay, so what is the chance that the offspring of the following matings will show the trait? In these pedigree problems, the most important thing to do in the beginning is to write out all of the genotypes that you already know. So let's just do this for the pedigree. So starting up here at the first generation, individual 1, we know has the traits, that's little a. Individual 1, 2, looking at it at first glance, you might think, okay, individual 1, 2 can be big A, or big A, little a. But because individual 2, 5 has the condition, right, little a, has this recessive condition, then we know that individual 1, 2 has to be a carrier because individual 2, 5 had to inherit a little a from each of its parents. Okay, so we obviously know all of the individuals that have the trait little a. We can write those in if we feel like we need to. Okay, so now let's look at the second generation. So the second generation, this individual 2, 1 is big A, little a. Why? Because we know that individual had to have inherited a little a from individual 1, 1, but then also had to have inherited the big A from her father because she doesn't have the condition. Individual 2, 2 here, there's no evidence to the contrary that individual 2, 2 is a carrier because none of these individuals are affected. So we know that individual 2, 2 has a genotype of big A, big A. Here again, 2, 3 is just like 2, 1. It's going to be a carrier, big A, little a. Also, 2, 7 over here is also going to be a carrier for the same reasoning, big A, little a. You see here 2, 4 necessarily has to be a carrier, right? Because two carriers, each parent has to be a carrier for the child, the son here, to have the recessive condition, the little a, little a. And so individual 2, 4 also. 2, 6 is big A, big A. Why? Because there's no evidence to the contrary. We already did 2, 7. 2, 8 is big A also because there's no evidence to the contrary. The other ones that we know are 3, 9, big A, marrying into the family, right? But not having any evidence that they're carriers. So we assume that individual is big A, 3, 10, also big A, and all three of the offspring of 2, 5, and 2, 6 are also carriers because they have an affected mother. Okay, so we wrote all of those down. It takes a second, but it just makes the whole rest of the problem that much easier. So now let's go to the individual problems, individual questions. So we're looking at A, what is the probability that individual 3, 1 and 3, 12 will get together, have an offspring, and that offspring will be affected with this recessive condition? So what we do, just like with all of our other problems, we have to break down our what might seem a complex problem, right, into a bunch of smaller, simpler problems. And so in this case, we just individually, we first sort of assume, we mentioned this before, that for a child to have the condition, both parents have to be carriers. And so we're going to calculate the probability that each of the parents is a carrier. And then at the end say, okay, assuming each parent is a carrier, what is the probability that they have an offspring that has the condition? And so for the first one, 3, 1, right? So you come look up here, individual 3, 1. What is the probability that that individual is a carrier? It has the possibility of either being big A, or big A, little a. And to find out the probability, we just come over here and do a little Punnett square. And what we see is 2 out of the 4 cells are carriers, 2 out of the 4 cells are homozygous dominant. And so that individual has a 1/2 chance of being a carrier. All right, let's go over to 312. This individual here, 312, what is the probability that 312 is a carrier? The probability is 1 because that individual, his mother, has a little a genotype, it has that recessive condition. So all of the offspring have to be carriers, right? So we know that those offsprings are carriers, right? And we also know that that offspring doesn't have the condition, and that's how come we had the big A here over on 2,6. But what's the probability? So when we know for certain that an individual is a carrier, we just put 1 as the probability. It's a 100% chance. Okay, so now given both of the parents are carriers, we come over here to this Punnett square. We say, okay, what is the probability if both of those parents are carriers that they have an offspring that has the condition, little a condition? It just goes back to that simple Punnett square, little a, and that equals 1/4. So now all 3 of these events have to happen for the offspring to have the condition. So if event A, B, and C has to happen, here are the 3 events have to happen. What's the total probability? This event and this event and this event, you multiply it. So you just go 1/2 times 1 times 1/4, and that equals 1/8. Okay, B, same thing, same protocol. We do this, we just basically break it all down and do the same thing. And so what is the probability that 3, 4 is a carrier? It's just like 3, 1. So the probability is 1/2. What's the probability that 3, 14 is a carrier? It would be that same Punnett square. That probability would also be 1/2. If both are carriers, what is the probability that the offspring has the condition? Come back over here to this Punnett square. 1/4, all 3 events, 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/4 equals 1/16. Okay, now let's move on to C. We're looking at a mating between 3,6 and 3,13. So come over here to 3,6 and we say, okay, what is the probability that 3,6 is a carrier? And so the parents are both carriers, right? We determined that 2,4 was a carrier because they have an offspring that is affected. And so we're looking at this Punnett square. So what is the probability that 3,6 is a carrier? We see that 2 of the cells, right, are carriers and 2 aren't. But we also have information that that individual is not little a, because if it was, it would be filled in, and that individual would have the trait, right? And so that's not a possibility. That cell is not a possibility. So these other remaining 3 are the only possibilities. 2 of the 3 are carriers. So that means that the probability that 3,6 is a carrier is 2/3. Okay, now let's look at 313. Probability 313 is a carrier. Over here, what do we see? It was just like we looked at previously. It's a known carrier, so the probability is 1. So now both are carriers. What's the probability that they have an offspring? Again, it's this Punnett square, 1/4. So you just go 2/3 times 1 times 1/4 equals 2/12 or 1/6. Okay, now let's go to the most difficult one. And this is the most difficult one because we have to kind of look at a couple of different generations. And so it's saying, what is the probability of 4,1 and 4,2 getting together and having a child that has that recessive condition? And so what we have to do, we have to figure out, again, probability that 4,1 is a carrier and 4,2 is a carrier. But what we see here with 4,1, for 4,1 to be a carrier, we also have to have 3,8 being a carrier. And we're not guaranteed that 3,8, individual 3,8 is a carrier. So we first have to calculate the probability that 3,8 is a carrier. And then we'll say, okay, given 3,8 is a carrier, what is the probability that 4,1 is a carrier? So we've broken this down. Okay, what's the probability that 4,1 is a carrier? If 3,8 is a carrier, first we go here, calculate the probability that 3,8 is a carrier. And so that's how we do it. We'd come here, 3,8. The probability that 3,8, just like we did just barely, is a carrier is 2/3. Now, if 3,8 is a carrier, big A, little a, and it's getting together with the big A, the probability that 4,1 now is a carrier is 1/2. So we've calculated the probability of both of those events. Now let's move on to 4,2. What's the probability that 4,2 is a carrier? We now know already that 3,11 is a carrier because that child, that son or that daughter has a mother that is a carrier. So 11,3 has to be a carrier. So we don't even have to incorporate that one. We just have to look at, okay, If 310 gets together with 311, what's the probability that 4-2 is a carrier? And that's equal to 1/2. Now we've said, okay, we've sort of incorporated, we've figured out what are all the probabilities for these two to be carriers. If these two are carriers, what's the probability that they have an offspring that is affected? That is 1/4. So to have all 4 of these events happen, we have to times this one and that one and that one and that one. You go 1/2 times 2/3 times 1/2 times 1/4 equals 2/48 or 1/24. And that's that. Then that's as complicated of a pedigree that you will see in this exam. This is sort of an upper level of the complications of the one, especially this 323D. Okay, so go back through, make sure all of that is understandable, and good luck. Let's see if we can stop this thing. Let's see. Okay, there we go.